We're not out there fighting anything other than crime.
We see stuff that nobody should have to
Put
see.
your hands back! Hands it back! Hands it back! Go!
Get out of it, man. Get out of it! Get out of it!
Don't move! Don't move!
Okay. Shorts 31, erect out.
Don't go!
Put it in paper. You're going to jail. Where else do you think you're going?
You're listening to The Beat, profiles of police nationwide. As I was talking about with our guest who I'll introduce in a moment, so many police officers and firefighters throughout the country getting it done outside of New York City. And it's important that we chronicle everything that they did over the years. Welcome back to yet another volume of The Beat on this 266th episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Previous episode was volume 5 of The Beat. And what I mentioned in the previous episode, and this will continue to be a theme, is it not only encompasses local law enforcement from around the country, I should say, and outside New York City, specifically in the surrounding towns such as Yonkers, as we did with Chief Mueller for volume 2 of the miniseries, but federal agents too will be a part of it. And Ken Strange was that with the FBI, U.S. Agency for International Development, and Department of Justice. So thanks to him, and it'll be a great conversation with my next guest tonight, who, like I said, I'll introduce momentarily. I would like to shout out Darren Phillips, because that's the reason that you see me wearing this Vancouver Canucks Pavel Bure jersey. I don't know if you could see the logo. There you can. So I promised him I would wear it in the next episode, and here I am doing just that. It was nice to meet Darren yesterday, along with the other members of the FDNY community at large, specifically the members of Squad 288 for the remembrance of 9/11 22 years later. Also, shout out to everybody at NYPD Emergency Service Squad 2 in Harlem. Great to meet them too yesterday and spend some time with them. Really a great day in the city, as it marked 22 years since that terrible day in 2001. Now to our sponsors, and of course, this one's not really a sponsor, but like I said, I have a consulting company and I want you to know about it. Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company. Little technical difficulties there, but that's okay. And now for a word from Joe Murray. If you're ever caught on the wrong end of the law, call Joe Murray. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer turned criminal defense attorney. With 15 years of experience in the NYPD from 1987 until 2002, he parlayed a successful career in the NYPD into an equally successful career as a criminal defense attorney. His website is jmurray-law.com, where you can reach him at 646-838-1702, or just email him at joe@jmurray-law.com. Hopefully I'll be seeing Joe real soon. More on that when the time comes. And before I introduce my next guest, shout out to Billy Ryan, John Costello, and Joe Maliga in the live chat. My next guest spent nearly 30 years on patrol and later on as a supervisor in the Paramus, New Jersey Police Department, dealing with a fairly large contingent of local residents, but an even larger contingent, as he'll discuss tonight with me, of commuters. Paramus, as he'll tell me, was certainly an interesting place to work. And that, for this volume 6 of The Beat, is former Paramus Police Chief, retired Paramus Police Chief, I should say, Jim Sheehan. Jim, welcome. How are you? Great to have you tonight.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And shout out to Steve Youre, and it was nice to meet you, sir, yesterday in Queens for the Squad 288 Hazmat 1 get-together. So you originally, as you were telling us off the air, were born in the Bronx, lived there until you were about 5, and is that when you moved to Paramus?
Yeah, that's we ran. We fled. Not my dad didn't want to go. He's a Bronx Irish Catholic. He wanted to stay there, but my mom, she was a Newfie. She was from Newfoundland originally, and she wanted to get out. She wanted to get out of the city. She wanted the country. She wanted us to actually know what a lawn was.
Yeah, that's a common theme you hear a lot with people that leave the city for that reason. They that live in areas where it's not like Queens, for example. You see some nice houses out there, or Staten Island. Yeah, it's a little bit tough. And the city was kind of changing at that point too. So, growing up for most of your life in Paramus, for those not familiar with it, tell me about the kind of city that Paramus is.
Well, it's definitely suburban. A little, you might say urban suburban, but it's only about 28,000 residents. Has a very large transient population. Sometimes between 250, 300,000 people, or more than 50% commercial. But when we moved there, it was primarily a blue collar town. It was a commuter town, but not just to New York. I mean, like a lot of my neighbors, friends of mine on the block, their parents worked in, Jersey City. They worked in Newark, American Can, different kind of, GE. There was a lot of industry in Jersey in the 60s. Much of it gone. I mean, when I went to work there in '81, it was definitely less blue collar, and I'd say now it's not blue collar at all. I mean, you rarely find a house. It was typical post World War II suburb, Cape Cod houses, and the very defined areas of commercial. So if you lived in a development, you didn't have a corner store or anything like that. But if you were, walk down towards the highways or whatnot, there was a lot of retail.
I can imagine. And you really saw that throughout the 80s and 90s, and especially into the 2000s. I don't want to use the word gentrification, but for lack of a better way to word it, that's kind of what happened, where it became less and less, like you said, blue collar. And as one generation faded away, another came in. And it's not that it's necessarily bad. It does have its perks one way or the other. But I can understand it. You kind of see the same thing here in New Haven, too. We used to be a city of factories. Now, you'd be hard pressed to find anything like that. So it's a symptom countrywide, I feel.
Yeah, that's true. And we Paramus had a lot of light industry, even when I first came on the job. And most of those places are turned to office parks and,
right.
Other types of commercial buildings, but not industry.
Yeah, no, of course. So tell me, I mean, I know you took as you were telling me off the air, the NYPD test originally in 1977. And we know where you would end up, as we'll discuss tonight as we go. But where did the interest in civil service, if not strictly law enforcement, come in? Did you have any family on the job?
I did have family on the job, but that really wasn't what influenced me. I think what influenced me was, typical suburban kids, out in the street, everybody very early on, people were drinking and, raising hell. And we hated the cops because everybody hated the cops in the 60s. We call them names and whatnot. And in particular, a Paramus cop, Mike McEllen, kind of, he came by one day and we were all yelling names at him, and he kind of hung his hand out the window at us and gave us the finger, then rolled back around and engaged us. And we're like, no one had ever done that. And he had a lot of influence on me and, made me think about it. Before that, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Okay, so you take that test in 77, and you mentioned it was your goal originally to try to be an NYPD cop. Of course, this is right after the layoffs. This is in the middle of that Ford to City drop dead, the infamous headline in the newspapers from that time, because the city was struggling financially. Cops and firemen who were laid off ended up becoming bus drivers, and eventually they got their jobs back. But it was not a pleasant time for a variety of reasons, but you still needed bodies. And rather, if those bodies were going to go to transit, housing, or the NYPD, you needed people either way. So taking the test for the NYPD, was there any, given the fact the city was so dangerous at the time, was there any concern from your family, or were they supportive?
No, I not really. My grandfather, his brothers all had, they called them stores, but they were all bars in the city. And they were very pro police. So I didn't want to be a cop in the suburbs. I wanted to be a cop in the city. So I took that test, but at the time I took every test. I'd just gotten out of high school. I was in college, and I took Paramus' test in 77 too. In New York City, during the testing process, every time I went to any, medical, the psych, I pushed back behind a lot of guys coming back that had been laid off. They were constantly coming back. So in 81, I was on, I had already worked for a year in Maine as I could get into that as a deputy sheriff, but I came back home, hoping that I was going to get the city job. And Paramus called me. When I called my investigator, he told me that I would have a mental problem if I didn't take the Paramus job, so I took it. I was mowing lawns. So my idea was like, hey, I'll give it up and go somewhere else. But, you kind of get hooked into something, and I stayed.
Right. And listen, you had a lot to do there in your own right, so it was a good decision to stay. We're talking with retired Chief Jim Sheehan. This is Volume 6 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. So, of course, like you said, 1980, you leave home temporarily and you spend a year in Maine as a deputy sheriff. Now, talk about culture shock. You're in a relatively industrial city, at least still at the time, and then you go up north and you go on over to Maine. And that had to be quite interesting for a young guy, given what you grew up around, what you were used to. Why Maine specifically?
Well, I went to Northeastern University, which is a cooperative education program. So I'd actually done 2 co-ops. Co-ops were, full-time jobs, you got paid. Northeastern guaranteed them being filled. You meet a lot of guys in DEA, customs, whatnot, all came out of that program. So I had done 2 co-ops at DEA when it was on 57th Street. I worked in the base, in the radio, and I had another co-op coming up. I went into the co-op office. I kind of, pushed them heavy. They wanted me to go back to DEA because if you did 2 co-ops at DEA, basically you wound up going to Quantico as soon as you graduated. But I wanted to be a cop, and I still wanted to be a New York City cop. So I said, hey, I want to see something different, something I didn't know. So I went up to Maine to interview as a sheriff's aide in the Androscoggin County Sheriff's Department, competing against another guy, Jeff Harmon. The 2 of us went up there. He was from Maine. And the sheriff talked to us, and he said, hey, I don't really need an aide, but I could use a couple of deputies. And he hired us. No academy. We had 1 year to send us to the academy. The deal was if he had the money at the end of the year, he'd send us if we wanted to go. And if he didn't have the money, we had to give him a handshake that we weren't going to hold him to it. Neither of us wanted to go. I don't even know if he had the money. We let him know at a certain point, like, hey, this is great, but we're not staying. And Jeff went on to the Maine State Police. He retired a lieutenant colonel. So, and I came down to Jersey hoping to go on NYPD.
So, that year that you spent up there, I imagine definitely a lot quieter, like we were talking about, compared to what you grew up with in Paramus. But tell me about learning your beat up there, and is there an arrest or at least an interaction that sticks out from that year?
I think I have more stories from 1 year in Maine. First off, Jeff and I were like 2 sponges. So people would call us up and like, hey, you want to ride with me tonight or whatever. So I rode with troopers, game wardens. I rode with troopers on the Maine Turnpike. Sometimes I'd work a shift and I'd stay and ride around with another deputy that was coming on. We had 450 square miles. Oftentimes you were the only car out there. So there were lots of funny things. I mean, I screwed a lot of things up there. Luckily, before I came to the job I was staying on, I dropped radios into the Androscoggin River and, all kinds of, things that you do when you're 22 years old, it was a great experience. We worked the jail. We worked, we even did a lot of, sometimes we covered detectives on the weekends. So we had never gone to an academy. So when I went to the academy, I had paid a lot of attention to things like a motor vehicle accident. You don't know how to handle a motor vehicle accident. That's like that's a crisis intervention. Everybody's mad at each other. And you show up and you don't know what you're doing. It's very embarrassing.
Right. It's always, and it's the same thing for domestics, right? I remember a cop in an episode of Cops in Cleveland talking about that they're mad at each other, but when that third party comes in, where's all the anger and venom being directed towards that third party? So if you can diffuse that, be all right. Like you said, it's important to know what you're doing. I don't know if you remember him, but Richard Carey's in the chat. He's a Paramus PD retiree.
Yeah, he was a chief. He was my chief. He was the chief before me. I was actually the acting chief for 8 months. I never was permanently appointed. I was deputy chief for Rick. Very, very, one of the best guys I ever worked with and for. So, yeah. It's funny that you bring up domestic because I always felt like that was like, you're a 23-year-old kid with no experience and you walk in and people just tell you everything. And they expect you to mediate it. And first time you're trying to get over what you heard, like what? So it was always interesting, domestics, and they're dangerous. When I started the job, everyone said, "Hey, domestic, most dangerous job you could go to." By the time I came off patrol, 19 years later, domestics were dangerous because if you didn't do the paperwork right, you were in big trouble.
Right. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, a lot of administrative work with calls of that nature. So, of course, like you said, you were hoping to get onto the NYPD. That didn't happen. You got onto Paramus instead because your investigator called you and told you what he told you. So was there a part of you that said, geez, even though I heard what you said earlier, and that's true, but was there at least a part of you that said, man, I really wanted the NYPD? Or were you just happy to get on the job in your hometown where you knew at least, hey, it may not be a city of 8 million people, but I'm not going to be bored. I am going to be busy.
Well, now, to be honest with you, I don't think I ever stopped thinking that I would like to have got on NYPD. I don't know, I don't know where I would have gone. I don't know what would have happened to me. I did very well in Paramus, but I was on a rocky road for most of the first 19 years. I don't think, I'm not very good in the bureaucracy, so maybe I would have been really in bad shape in NYPD. But but there were, I bumped heads with a lot of people in Paramus, and I ran for union office very young, 5 years on, got elected, and that stunted my career quite a bit. I took it very seriously, and made a lot of enemies.
Well, it's a thankless job. It's a thankless job, and it's a very tough job, and my hat's off to people that are willing to do it. This is interesting in that, and I see this from reading Bill Bratton's book, and I think this was also a countrywide symptom. And I'm not knocking the previous generation. They put in their work too, but you had a generation of cops. This is the World War II, Vietnam generation of cops that were at the end of their careers, didn't really want to engage in anything, didn't really want to do anything. Was that all of them? Of course not, but a good few that just by that point were non-committal. And then you have these young kids that are hot, full of energy, and as the old saying goes, piss and vinegar to go do the job, and ready to go and combat any kind of crime that they can. So did you find that kind of an attitude was prevalent in the department at the time? Were you battling against that old guard, or were you more so encouraged to go out there and do the job?
I wasn't encouraged to go out and do the job. That's for sure. I did wind up on a squad, my first squad, with some really solid senior guys who wanted to work. So we were kind of an anomalous. We had a 6-squad system. We did a 5-on-2 off, 5-on-3 off weekly rotation, and that squad was, derogatively other supervisors labeled us the Wolf Pack. But we worked hard, and everyone backed each other up. We made a lot of arrests, and we took care of each other. Those were my best days in patrol. I didn't always work with guys like that. Well, you have to know Paramus too. It like grew exponentially. So when I went on a job, I think when I got hired, there were 85 cops. When I retired, the TO was 120 something, but we didn't have 120 cops. Never did. Hovered right around 100, always dropping people off. But they did studies every now and then. Mainly to try and reduce the force, and the consultants would say, "Oh no, you don't have enough cops, for the calls for service." But that, when I say exponentially, I mean, so my first captain, who was a gentleman, a nice man, but he had come on the job in 1947, made captain in 1953. So I came out in 1981. He was the patrol captain since 1953. In 1953, they had stick shift cars and 3 sectors and dirt roads, and so. They didn't build the walls till 1958, and it was undeveloped really. Paramus going back to the 40s was like truck farms on the east side and celery farms on the west side, right. And some of those people were still around. That was they would show up at council meetings and whatnot. You still run into some of those folks.
Yeah, from that prior generation, as we were discussing previously. So describe the makeup of the sector, at least demographically, that you were first assigned to. Was it primarily Irish, Hispanic, Black?
Oh, that's Paramus didn't have there was no ethnicity in it. As a matter of fact, the first sector I was assigned to was primarily industrial, had a cemetery and 2 golf courses in it, some bars, and a strip of Route 17, with a lot of commercial. That was it was considered to be kind of a dead sector, but I liked it. It was in the middle. And you could kind of go elsewhere where things were happening. But as far as residentially, Paramus is really, like I said, it's pretty much white, middle class, or I wouldn't say upper middle class. Maybe now you would say it, but blue collar for the most part. When it started, when demographics changed, really it primarily became very Asian, South Asian, and East Asian. After Hong Kong closed, we had a big influx of Chinese, but not, we never had residentially a real diverse community. Now the service population was extremely diverse. I mean, Paramus sits 6 miles from Manhattan, 3 miles from Patterson, 10 miles north of Newark. You have our service population from people who worked in all of the commercial establishments, and then from people who shopped, and then people who shopped on the shoppers. That was we had a lot of that kind of retail crime, muggings and auto theft, breaking into cars, shoplifting was probably our prime, with tons of shoplifters. But those people oftentimes can be a lot more dangerous than you think. Before we had automated fingerprints, before the AFIS system, you didn't know who you had. You'd be releasing them, and then you find out that they were wanted for something heinous. Right. So it was in that way. So we had a diverse service population, but not a real diverse resident population.
And what makes that interesting is that, and also there's a lot of tractor trailer thefts going around at this time too. People would rob the goods off the tractor trailer. Is that, again, this is why we have the beat. Your beat was not only those within your community, but as I mentioned in the introduction of you have so many people in transit all the time. And there's that propensity to try and get away, especially if hey, the highway's right there. I can peel off to Pennsylvania. I can run off to Yonkers. I can run off into New York City. And I don't know and I don't think at least they'll ever catch me. Maybe I might get caught by another agency and they'll extradite me, but I know this agency is not going to catch me, or at least so they think. And that's what makes the beat tough when you have so many quite literally moving parts. So as time progressed, did that change the way that you were instructed as a police officer? Or did that change the way that you later on instructed others, given what you're dealing with?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it was it was definitely a unique form of policing. It wasn't the same, like in Bergen County. In Bergen County's got 70 police agencies. Well, 72 police agencies, 69 municipalities. So I think we were very different. We were a lot closer to like Fort Lee. Fort Lee was like Paramus sticking out. Fort Lee's like 1 mile square, and then they have a lot of high rises. Paramus is 10.75 square miles, and it's nothing over 5 story. Well, a couple 9-story buildings, but nothing really commercially or residentially over 5 stories. And Hackensack. So if you look at the Route 4 corridor from George Washington Bridge out to Patterson, those are the departments that are probably the busiest with the largest. So it's Fort Lee, Englewood, Teaneck, Hackensack, Paramus, and then Fairlawn and Elmwood Park are two smaller agencies, but still busy. They border right up on Patterson. So and Patterson's always been a tough city.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was going to say some of those transients and miscreants, if you will, coming on over to your city is definitely going to keep you busy besides what you're already dealing with. So keep an eye on.
I always said Patterson. We had a lot of clients from Patterson.
You most certainly did. Is there a call from those early years on patrol that stands out, either because it was hilarious, either because it was really dangerous, or ended up in a good arrest that you can think of?
I don't know. So, I mean, I have a lot of great stories that are that are funny. I mean, there's one that my kids always like to hear is we had a frequent flyer EDP who could be pretty violent, and very early on I kind of built a rapport with him. So when things were going bad, they oftentimes they'd call me out of my sector and say, hey, respond to that down there, and I could usually calm him down. So this particular day, he had he had apparently gone in Rochelle Park, the southern part of Paramus, borders Rochelle Park. He had gone just over the border into Rochelle Park to a 7-Eleven. He used to walk around with a German Shepherd dog, and he followed him everywhere. It was really a character, but they stole a car. A guy left his car running. They got in the car. He said, I saw this long-haired big guy with a dog take my car. And they recover the car in Bergenfield. So I get Bergenfield and Rochelle Park. I go in there. I guess they're going to try and arrest him for the stolen car. But I go, they send me down to go with them. So I knock on the door. His mom answers the door. She says to me, "Oh my God, Mr. Sheehan, what did he do now?" And I said, "I really don't know." But these two detectives want to talk to him. He's standing in the far corner of an old house. It's an old house with a big living room, kind of like high ceiling, whatever. And the dog is sitting opposite him, like in the other end of the room. And they come in. He says, he looks at me with a smile. He says, "What's up? Who are these guys?" I said, they'll explain it. So they say, "We're here to talk to you about the car you stole." He said, "I didn't steal any car." So they hold up the dog's collar, and they're like, "We found this collar in the car." And he looks at the dog and he says, "Louie, Louie, Louie," and the dog's ears go back like this. He goes, "Take him away, officers. He got locked up in the pound. He was in with those Patterson dogs, and now he's stealing cars." I mean, we're going to do DNA or anything, but yeah, it was that that was more comical to me, but I saw lots of funny stuff. I mean, when you're a cop, there's lots of things that are funny that I probably, we find funny, but not everyone might find them funny.
Oh, it's the absurdity of life. That's what makes it funny. Of course, a moment like that is quite absurd. And I'm just picturing the dog kind of like Scooby-Doo, Ruh-roh.
It happened. I wish that's one time I wish I had a body cam.
Oh yeah, that's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. And what can you do, right? It's the old saying, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. In a situation like that, you can't help but laugh. It is funny in all the different ways, from the ha-ha standpoint, from the ironic standpoint. It's definitely quite humorous. So you're going about your career through the 80s, and by the time 1991 comes around, it's 10 years on. And you've had the chance by this point, smack dab in the middle of your career, to be taught. And you've also had the opportunity by this point to teach others. So balancing those two roles, where now younger cops are looking at you, but you still want to be that sponge because you still have a long way to go in your career. Tell me about that transition for you as you started to tack on seniority as a patrol officer.
Well, I was just finishing up a union stint there. So 1986 to 92, I was vice president and president of the union.
Oh, right.
I was teaching at the academy. I had in 1996 I went back to school for my master's. So 91 to 96 there I was kind of just, I was surviving, to be honest with you. I mean, I bumped quite a few heads in the union. I actually had started getting passed over for a promotion, based on some political issues. So I filed a lawsuit in 1993 against the municipality. So most of the time I was in bunker mode. I was still doing my job. I never stopped doing my job, but I was careful.
Right. No, I can understand that. So actually, let's touch on that for a second without getting too much in the bureaucracy. That union job, as we were talking about earlier, is a very thankless one. It's a very tough position to be in. For that reason, you never know who you're going to rankle nor why. And it doesn't matter where you work. And public sector unions for both fire departments and police departments are always very, very tricky roads and at times minefields. So what made you want to take on that position? Were you discontent or dissatisfied with what you were seeing in the department at the time?
Yeah. So in 94, we were voting on a contract, and I was only on a job. 84, I should say. We were voting on a contract, and I went in to vote, and the union officers that were in power at the time were saying, "Hey, vote this way, vote this way." And I said, "Well, what are we talking about here?" And it was basically one of those, we're going to get something, and the unborn are going to pay for it. So it was it was a diminished, changing the step program from like a 4-step to a 10-step. Vacation was like almost in half, whatever. So I I wouldn't vote, and I wouldn't vote for it. I got a lot of senior guys jumping down my throat. But when it was over and it had actually occurred, and then we did a hiring, we hired a bunch of guys who all were screwed. People started saying to me, "Hey, you ought to run for office." So I did, and I surprisingly won because I only had, I only had like 5 years on a job, 4.5 years on a job. So, and I thought I accomplished a lot in the union, but I did bang heads with some people. Inevitable. But I banged heads with some people that had very long memories.
No, well, that's always the tricky part of it too. And one thing I would ask you about with that position of that nature is that one aspect that some have criticized, not of you specifically, but unions in general, is that guy or that gal, they're not on the street anymore. They're not in the firehouse anymore. They're not on the beat with us, so they don't get it. They're in that office all day. And they feel that gradually these people lose touch with the rank and file. You don't want that to happen because you want that trust to be there. And you want them to feel like they're being understood. Not just listen to, all right, let me jot these demands down. Okay, we'll see what we can do. But listen to and understood. So tell me about the key for you to make sure that even if you were primarily in the office at this point and not out on the street as much, you still maintain that emotional bond and understanding with the rank and file that you were representing.
So, I mean, our job wasn't that big. So, you did have association days. You had days that you could take a certain amount of days, but I never left. I was still on my squad. I was still on patrol. And, and if I took a day, sometimes what would happen is I'd need time, but there wouldn't be enough people working. So if I took time to do something, the other guys were handling my jobs. So it kept me well connected. I never was really off the street or got a big bonus out of being a union guy. I mean, there were some perks, but they really didn't outweigh the negatives. But I have that problem where I get really immersed in something, and I didn't want to quit. But at the end, I have to say, at the end of that 6-year period, I was pretty much burnt out. I
can understand.
Yeah,
I can see why. Not to jump ahead, we'll of course get to your rank ascension as we go along tonight. But when you became chief later on, deputy chief, I should say, or maintained other ranks of authority in the department, do you feel, especially as a deputy chief, that your prior experience in the union helped you better understand and negotiate, if necessary, with the union heads that came after you?
I definitely. I saw some, there are some exploitive people that run for union office, and I would say between my time as a union president and my time later on as a boss, I saw some of that, but I worked out pretty well. I mean, I remember one time that so as in Paramus, the PBA, we represented from patrolman to captain. So we didn't have a separate. There was no captain's endowment or whatever. So a detective was a promotion way else, like New York City was. You got a gold shield, you went halfway to the next rank. But you represented all of them. So that was sometimes difficult too, because some of our divisions, felt like, hey, I should get more. I should get other perks. And there was, that cops are inherently jealous. So you bang into that a little bit. But I was in a detective bureau. I was the union president. I was in a detective bureau, and there was something posted up on the board that said the union president has developed a symbiotic relationship with the administration. I knew who wrote it, so I went and knocked on his door in his office, and I said, "Hey," I said, "Thank you." He said, "What?" I said, "Thank you. That's a pretty good compliment." He said, "It wasn't meant as one." I said, "No, I know it wasn't, but think about it. We're parasites. We're parasites. We can't kill the host." That was what they were mad at me sometimes too, because I rocked them back in a few negotiations. And then I backed off a little, because you can't bankrupt the municipality. What's going to happen to you?
Exactly. Yeah. And not only that, but looking out for the unborn too, which for those of you that may not be familiar with the vernacular, means those that will come on the job in the future. You want to make sure that, again, if you would like people to take the job, they're not coming into a situation where I'm not going to get paid that well. Because even if people view it as a calling, and there's still many that do, financial security is important for yourself. And if you have a family, want to have a family, it's not exactly going to incentivize you to want to take the job. And that's something that, unfortunately, you see a lot of people disregard, which is, screw them. No. Because then again, you're going to be depleted down the road because you're going to be wondering, why does nobody want this job? Because you're not paying them well enough.
And tiering of, tiered pensions, medical benefit changes. I mean, they're happening everywhere. I mean, that was a really kind of a, we had that happen in Jersey. I really couldn't even stop it. Became legislative. But those things they do screw people, and it's tough working with a guy. And I know, like there were, like on our job at one point we had like 5 guys that were hired 1 month before 10 guys, and those 5 guys were making double what the 10 guys were making.
Yeah,
like, it was crazy, that. But politically, and what we look what we're saving in taxes. I mean, people don't think about morale.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, morale's important. You can't put a price on that. You definitely can't put a price on that. Talking with retired Chief James Sheehan for Volume 6 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. Matt Shirley, I see in the chat. I didn't forget about the gentleman that you recommended to me, Matt. I want you to know that. I will call him. I haven't forgotten about that. I haven't gotten the chance to call him yet, but I will. So thanks for tuning in tonight, buddy. Dawn Gonzalez, Joe Malika's better half. She's also here. Shout out to you, Dawn. I didn't want to forget about you either. So that brings us, well, actually, before I get to your promotion in May of 2001 to Sergeant, nationwide, but especially in the New York City area, especially in the tri-state area, you're starting to see this renaissance to where there's that trickle-down effect. If New York City's doing bad, unfortunately, you start to see the trickle-down effect of the surrounding areas. If New York City's on the up and up, as it was when Bill Bratton came in 1994 as NYPD commissioner, vice versa, you start to see a positive effect. And really nationwide, like I said, we went from a terrible year in 1990 where crime was at an all-time high pretty much across the board to where now collectively things are being done to better supplement and aid law enforcement, and not just tracking crime and not just making arrests, but preventing it in the first place. Proactive policing is being encouraged. I don't know how bad the crime problem was in Paramus back then, if it was good, if it was not so good, but nevertheless, as you saw the whole broken windows theory take shape everywhere, but especially right next door, if you will. Tell me about how that impacted Paramus, if at all.
Not much. It was not, I would say, individually, guys, there were, when I came on, even like, 1981, somebody said to me, that sector is your sector. Mm-hmm. You take care of it. You go to any job and somebody has to go there after you. You didn't do your job. Those kind of things like problem solving, policing, where no one was talking about that. But I worked with some guys that were talking about it. But I saw that was just individuals, was something that, you tried to encourage. We didn't always hire residents, and we went through different fluxes. So we had a consent decree for a while in Paramus, and, we did some testing. We did a lot of testing. We did a lot of hiring from all over. And, there was this kind of feeling like, oh, if you're a hometown cop, you're going to do a better job. But that was BS. It depends on who you are. If you're a good cop, you're a good cop. Doesn't matter where you live. But the people that we hired from Paramus was always, I always got a kick out of watching their face, because if I had them as an FTO or anything, I'd say, hey, this ain't the place you grew up in. You're going to see a very different world. Like if you had a South End sector in Paramus, you might not deal with a Paramus resident, once or twice in your tour of 5 days. You would be dealing with, people from, business people, shoppers, bad guys, motor vehicle accidents, so you name it. So, it was a, I wouldn't say, as a matter of fact, like sometimes referring to New York City could get you kind of livy, like, what, we're not New York City. Right. It's right. I would venture to say that I worked with guys that probably didn't ever go to New York City.
And listen, they have enough going on in their own beat that they don't really have to.
I don't mean about the beat. I mean, just in their life, they didn't, it was not something, it wasn't a, not everybody went to the city. Not everybody, so, people, I always thought that like in Jersey, there was a little bit of a, kind of like a chip on your shoulder. Like, hey, we're not New York City,
right.
know?
Yeah. That was, and you saw that in the sports sector specifically with the New Jersey Nets for many years. That was kind of their slogan, especially once they got good with Jason Kidd and later on Vince Carter. The Devils, same thing. Once they got off the ground with Scott Stevens, Scott Niedermeyer, and Martin Brodeur, that was their calling card. We'll build our own identity, and that extended from everywhere in the state, and even in the entertainment side, Springsteen, of course. And if you're a television fan, a show like The Sopranos, it wasn't really based too much in the city. They did some filming there, but it was primarily, as one actor on the show said, the first time anybody was really introduced to North Jersey.
Well, if you worked in North Jersey, you weren't surprised that The Sopranos were shot in Jersey.
Oh yeah, of course. Well said. So that brings us into the spring of 2001. Now, by this point, you got 20 years on the job, so you've seen and you've done a lot, and you've experienced quite a bit from different facets. Being in patrol, working in the detective bureau, being in the union, being involved in that for a period of time, and now finally you want to go and try to become a sergeant, try to become a boss in the department. Now, it's interesting in that some guys do that with 5 years on, some guys do that with 10. I've never seen anybody, I'm not knocking you, this is actually really cool, do that with the level of experience that you'd had by this point. And it seemed like you were enjoying patrol, so this is a big step at such a different and late stage in your career. What made you want to make it?
Well, I mean, I think I mentioned to you, I filed a lawsuit against them in 1993.
Yeah.
I didn't get into court until 2000. They have a lot of money and they had a lot of lawyers and they file lots of motions. And in court, I didn't lose, but I didn't win. But I got promoted a couple of weeks later at the end of the trial. Well, we appealed it. We appealed a ridiculous ruling by a judge and went to the appellate division, and they didn't really get what I expected to get. I wasn't looking for money. I was looking for my promotion that they had. We had a mayor who had said after I hired some people that were a little bit more professional than the municipality was used to dealing with in a negotiation, and they did a audit on them, and we kind of killed them and got 4 really big numbers in a raise. And the mayor stood up and said, as long as he was alive, I'd never be promoted. I didn't think that could happen because but it was happening. So, but I did get promoted then, and I didn't really get I got put to trying to build our technology. We didn't really have much, and whatever we did have was not connected. So, I kind of fumbled through that, and then on September 11th, 2001, I was kind of the only boss that didn't really have a job. So I got every job that came in that was related to 2001. That really is where, that really kind of moved me along in my career, because all of a sudden it was like, all right, you may not like that guy, but he knows what he's doing in that, and we don't want to look foolish. Because Paramus got a lot of attention then for like soft targets and just how big populations we had in some of those malls and stuff. And I was lucky enough to get kind of hooked up in some intel stuff with the state police, and just gave me a lot of opportunity. And then you mentioned Rick Carey being on. I mean, Rick was like a legendary detective in our job. Really knew what he was doing, and he had gained rank, and I was able to really kind of get taken care of. He was my hook. And Freddie Carubia, I don't know if he's listening or not. He was chief before Rick, but those guys were Rick had been the bureau, but Freddie had been my boss on the road, and it was interesting. He said, like, as long as you don't worry about how he's doing it, Sheehan gets an outcome. So I appreciated that too, because I really am not big on being micromanaged. But yeah.
What's the old line? You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. So, of course, listen. And John Costello, hearing the chief speak of it being impossible to please all the PBA members, but easy to take a bunch of them off, reminds me of how miserable my years as PBA president were. And John was a police officer and hostage negotiator in Pennsylvania. So I hear you, John. I understand. I feel your pain. That's right. You could dock me 5 points.
I hear him too. So, I mean, I remember the Burton County Police, which no longer exists, but their PBA president, who was a friend of mine too, he grabbed me, he said, "Jim, what are you doing? Like, you got to stay in. We're like, we're fighting battles together. And I said, bro, I just want to represent one jerk, and that's me. I'm not representing the rest of these guys anymore.
So
my wife would freak out because I'd be like, one day, like a guy be like, sticking stuff on my locker, and then the next midnight he'd be jammed up and he'd be calling me at 4:00 in the morning. And she'd be like, just hang up on him. I'm like, I can't,
right.
But
it's tough. It's demanding mentally, and it kind of wears you out, like you said earlier. And I was saying, you can dock me 5 points for glossing over that. My apologies on that, because as you did say, yeah, you did sue in 1993, so you could have made sergeant earlier. And I guess so. Yeah, go ahead.
I should have made sergeant in 93.
Oh,
but you want to know, I will say, Mike, that I lamented it, and now that I'm retired, those extra 7 years out there, I patrol really. When I look back on it, I love being a cop. I really love being a cop.
Of course, it's great.
Yeah, you really stop being a cop. I mean, you still do cop things, and you still can every now and then. But when you give up that silver shield, you're not having the same. It's not the same thing.
Right. No, there's more responsibility, because now, I've covered this with many individuals that's been on the show from both the fire department perspective and the police department perspective, that, as I've said, and as they've talked about, you're not just looking after yourself anymore. Now you're in charge of not just yourself, but those around you, and your decisions that you're making are now affecting not just you, but them. And that's a hard mental transition to make, even if you have a lot of experience on the job, as you did by the time you made sergeant in May of 2001. It's not easy to say to yourself, oh man, this platoon, they're counting on me. That can be a little bit daunting.
No, and I think one of the things that struck me right off the bat was, I work with a lot of guys who were a lot of fun to work with. They weren't a lot of fun to supervise.
Yeah. I can recall a scene from Law and Order Exiled, which was a movie that came out in 1998. Mike Logan, the character portrayed by Chris Noth, he's investigating a homicide. By this point, his character was banished to Staten Island. And Captain Cragen, who later on was in Special Victims Unit at the time, was operating in internal affairs, at least in the context of the movie. And he says, I'm listening to these tapes, and they can't be talking about Mike Logan. But I think to myself, of all the years that you made me nuts in the 2-7, I said, of course it is. Great cop, but difficult to supervise, was Cragen's point. So yeah, there's a lot of go-getters out there that, like you said, you're glad you work with them, but man, oh man, do they thread the line in a good way. But man, it's interesting to watch them work, and interesting to watch the union presidents deal with the aftermath. But as the old saying goes, sometimes you'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission. That works too. At least in some context. Russ Porter says Jibby Sheehan was and is and will be a cop's cop. So he's watched tonight.
Thanks, Russ. I don't know. Most people don't know Russ. Russ is pretty legendary in the intel side. He was with the Director of National Intelligence. He was the law enforcement liaison for a number of years. Now he looks like Papa Smurf, so I don't have to put his picture up there. But yeah.
I'd like to get Russ on at some point. Then sounds like a guy.
I think Russ is a guy you should get on, Mike.
There you go.
From Iowa. He's from Iowa. He really is kind of like one of the fathers of law enforcement intel. On a national scene.
So, as you mentioned, right after 9/11, people are looking at soft targets. People are now focusing on the counterterrorism aspect everywhere where the population is relatively high. And that, as you said, advanced your career. Of course, you're not happy this happened. Nobody is. But now there's a renewed focus. And now there's, as a result, for lack of a better way to word it, new energy to be able to make sure that you protect the residents around you, and you put the necessary measures in place to be able to prepare in advance and stop these attacks if there's one in the works. So looking at it from the counterterrorism standpoint and being hooked up with the intelligence side, of course, whatever can't be said, and that's fine, don't. But as far as the surface level aspect, tell me about learning counterterrorism and learning how to fortify your city in the aftermath of something so horrible.
So I would not say that like I ever really worked counterterrorism. When I did retire, I did a stint with DOJ on the Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative. That would be the closest I would come to say like I was doing counterterrorism. But target hardening and whatnot, and I know you have an affinity for ESU. That's how we started ESU. At the time, the federal government was giving a lot of money out. They were buffer zone protection plans and whatnot, and we built ESU out of that buffer zone protection plan, really kind of mimicking NYPD's use of Hercules. But, at the time, we were primarily a one-man car. we built ESU. We sent them for training. We equipped them. We put them in a truck, and we made sure that we had an ESU unit out there whenever we had high populations, and sometimes we have 2 out there if we had dignitaries, whatever. Paramus was always, during UN General Assembly, we always got swamped with people coming shopping. There's no tax on clothing in Paramus and whatever. So we'd always wind up with the foreign minister from Iran, and you'd have diplomatic security and NYPD going crazy. But we were used to it. So that's where we built out an ESU unit, which we still have as today. So we still put it out there, but we didn't have anything like that before that. And then we did a lot of work with the commercial sector. A lot of information sharing, and that's really where when we talk about intel and information sharing, that's where we work very closely with the State Fusion Center, which is the Regional Operations Intelligence Center, the ROC, run out of West Trenton, which you might want to get some guys from that Fusion Center Association on. NYPD always, it's the only major urban area that didn't say a fusion center, but they had the LMSI, and you had John Miller, and you had a lot of collaboration. You had Cohen for a while, who wasn't always available to talk to us, but it was different. But I mean, as far as when people say counterterrorism, I wasn't. Even though Jersey was the spawning place of many of New York's terrorists, we didn't do anything to stop them.
Right. I mean, some of the 1993 World Trade Center bombers, their headquarters primarily was in Jersey City. Also, the assassins of Mayor Kahani in 1990, hello, doggy, were also based out of Jersey City as well.
Well, actually, El Sayed Nasser worked in a gas station in Ridgefield. He was living in Ridgefield Park, I think. One of the other, I could reverse. They're 2 next to each other communities. But when Eddie Norris and that crew came out and hit his house, they went with Burton County SWAT. And I was working in a movie theater at the time, off duty, with a Palestinian guy. And they called me up. The Burton County guy said, "Hey, that guy you work with, can you get a hold of him?" I'm like, "I'm with him right now." They're like, "Can he translate Arabic?" I said, "Nabil, can you translate Arabic?" He said, "Yeah, I can translate Arabic." So they came over with a book, and it was basically the Anarchist Cookbook translated into into Arabic.
My goodness.
Yeah.
That's.
And what happened after that, right? That all those files got scooped up by the Bureau, and they didn't really look at them again until 93, saying, "Hey, what the hell?"
Yeah. And at the time, I think the Calverton sessions, which also became a point of concern, were going on too, where these guys were training, doing firing sessions out there.
Out in Long Island, yeah.
Long Island. Yeah.
Yeah. So Bill, I think it's Atkins. He was an FBI agent that was, he had told me, I was with someone with him, and he showed me a photo of El Sayed Nasser with the two 93 bombers, them visiting him in prison. And they found in the apartment after those, jabronis friggin' tried to get their money back for the truck they tried to blow up the World Trade Center with.
I have to say, on the side note, I appreciate, as someone that grew up watching wrestling, and particularly promos by The Rock, I appreciate the use of the word jabroni. That was his signature. I'm glad that word made an appearance tonight on the Mike the New Haven podcast. We're talking with Chief Jim Sheehan. This is Volume 6 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. I see you in the chat, Howard Blank, retired NYPD detective out of Taru. Thank you, buddy, for being here as always, and hopefully I'll have you on the show next month. So at this point, between lieutenant and captain, guys tell me, once they make that first transition into a rank of authority, everything else, while not completely easy, becomes easier, because by this point you're at least a little bit more comfortable with being a boss and your role as a boss. And by this point, like you said, you're doing a lot more. So I imagine that was the case, right? As you made lieutenant, as you made captain, you're more comfortable by this point, so the transition wasn't as tough.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, my duties changed. I mean, captain was an interesting thing. I made captain when Fred Kruger was chief, but then Freddie retired, and Rick Carey was deputy chief, became chief, and they didn't make a deputy chief right away. We had 5 captains. I was the junior captain, and Rick named me as the executive officer of the department. So that was an interesting for me, because there were captains that were captains when I was a patrolman, so they weren't exactly happy. But then I made deputy chief. I have to say that, that I was lucky to have bosses at that, from lieutenant on, I was involved in a lot of things at the state. I'm involved in like, in a number of different, initiatives, and, they really let me do it. So and that really kind of fed into, the rest of my career.
And that's good, at least to have that support. It's imperative, because if you're not able to affect what you need to at that level, and if you're being, held back from being able to do that, the rank and file suffers. And we talked about morale earlier. It's going to take a gigantic hit if the leader is essentially rendered, figurehead, for lack of a better way to word it, and can't affect what he or she needs to. This is a question that Joe Maliga, who's a retired correctional officer, and this question from watching the show, always asks. It's a running joke, and he wants to know, did you ever deliver a baby?
So I have two almost delivery babies, but I didn't actually deliver them. We had Paramus is weird. I mean, when I came on a job, we had a lot of like no-tell motels and whatnot. And we had a motel hotel, which the hotel part of it was primarily, an SRO and a lot of kind of welfare and whatnot. And I got sent there once for a woman, in childbirth. And I responded with a good buddy of mine who's now dead. And the baby was actually breaching. The ambulance was pulling up outside. And he said to me, "Get your handcuffs out and handcuff her legs together. We're not doing this." And, he was joking, but they got in there in time. So I just watched. And another time I was parked in early in the morning in Van Swan Park in a River Edge car of an older guy I know pulled up to me and said, "Hey, Sheehan, I got a childbirth. I don't know what I'm doing. I know you do." I said, "I don't know what I'm doing," but I went with him. And this woman was actually, very close, but paramedics got there in time. So I have no storks or anything like that. I never delivered a baby. I saw them come out, and I saw my own come out too, but I didn't deliver those either.
Yeah, I can't imagine. That's stressful. And some officers have done that, and they've done a great job. I've seen stories where a car is going fast, they pull them over, and that's when they're told, "Hey, my girlfriend's having a baby," and that's when the game changes. But thrust into those situations, they do fine. But overall, you're pretty darn happy to see those paramedics pull up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. There's certain things. I mean, when I came on a job, we did CPR mouth to mouth. I did mouth to mouth on people, and I was always sick for a couple of days afterwards. So I mean, we didn't have bag masks, we didn't have anything. We didn't have defibs. As a matter of fact, the first time I used a defib, I mean, so I'd gone to so many people that were, you get sent to a lot of jobs that are medical and Paramus because of all the people shopping in malls, whatever. And I went to a job in a Home Depot, and the guy was on the ground. And he was, I'd seen that before. He was dead. He was like that. I got what they call aggro breathing, kind of, but it was over. But there were so many people in there. I'm like, all right, let me take this defib thing out that they gave me, and they gave me a little bit of training on it. I stuck those nodes on his chest and whatever. I pushed a button, boom, he was back. So yeah, things changed quite a bit. Defib saved a lot of lives.
So he made it. He survived.
Oh yeah.
Good. That's awesome.
I didn't do much. I just put they had a little chart, said stick this here and stick that there and push the button.
Yeah, that's something though, because if you didn't do it, he'd be dead.
Yeah, well, I did it. I did it really not thinking it was going to do anything. I said I just better do something because so many people are looking at me.
Nicely done though. Hey, it worked out. What a story. You saved my life. I just pushed the button.
I saw it work a lot of other times too.
Yeah, there you go. That's good. And I bet you if he's still around, he's probably still telling that story. Yeah, the guy just pushed the button. I came right back.
Yeah. I you never saw anybody after any of those things. So
yeah. Listen, at least they're able to go about it and keep living their lives. That's a good thing. Well done, my friend. Well done. So I think what's interesting about being a chief, specifically a deputy chief, as your role was, is that, as we talked about earlier, you have the personnel and also you have the personalities. Now, even though it's different from actually supervising them out in the field, as a leader, you try to play to your men and your women's strengths. You don't want to focus too much on the weaknesses. If there's things they can shore up, you help them improve, but you want to spot their talents first so that they're used to the best of their capabilities. And like we talked about quite a bit tonight, morale is maintained at a relatively high level. So for you, Tell me about that, playing to the strengths of your personnel and bringing out the best in them as a chief.
Well, you can only do so much too, Mike. You're in a, you got 100 cops, right? And you only plug people in. I thought about this a lot. I thought about this a lot after I left the job. You do your best to put the round pegs in the round holes and the square pegs in the square holes. I mean, I work with people who said, no, you're a square peg, but I'm going to hammer you into that round hole. That doesn't work. But there's another hole that is really kind of unique, and that's that star-shaped hole. You only get one or two of those guys on the job, and sometimes you burn them out because like a place like Paramus, you've got a couple of really talented people, and you try to give them all the jobs because they do it, and you can really burn them out. That was tough, and when Rick was chief and I was deputy chief, I mean, we pondered this quite a bit. And even in those assignments, because, sometimes the greatest cop does not make a great boss. You know what I mean? And sometimes a good sergeant does not make a good lieutenant, or you move them into a position that they just don't have the aptitude for. And that's not as much on them as it is on you. But how do you know sometimes? I oftentimes looked at people that I put in some positions that turned out to be, a little bit of a monster for me. And I'd look in the mirror and say, hey, Dr. Frankenstein, what the hell did you do? But you don't see it coming. And then I've seen other people that just, blossomed, give them an opportunity. They just blossomed. So, but, you only have, I mean, I think really, my view of police work, and even in Maine and in Paramus, and then I work with a lot of agencies right now in the position I'm in. You got I think in most organizations you got 10% of that organization that are the greatest human beings that you ever met, and you have 10% of that organization are maybe the worst human beings you ever met, and the 80% make or break that department. Which way they're influenced, which way they're flowing, and that 10% that are the greatest human beings may not be in leadership. So it's sometimes it's the luck of the draw. You could see places come together. I'll tell you a guy you got to have on it. Jimmy Saka, who's the chief of Elizabeth. I mean, he's turned that department around. And I talk to those guys, and they are so thrilled that he made chief. Which is makes me feel good. He's a real sharp guy. But it's a lot of its personalities, a lot of everything that we do in policing, collaboration. I mean, Bratton's thing, collaborate or die. I mean, that was my strength. I really don't understand why you wouldn't collaborate, but I have met many people that don't want to. But collaboration is a key. It really is. And I mean, even we always joke about New York City. I mean, NYPD as an organization, really tough to break. NYPD cops to deal with are unbelievably great to deal with. And I dealt with numerous. I mean, but the organization itself is the 500-pound gorilla. You can't break it.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting when you get cops or cops. And somebody out of we have a bunch of SF guys, Delta guys and Navy SEALs that do some of our tactical training for us, and they've been doing it for a while. You get to know them pretty good. And the funny thing is they love cop stories. They when you go out, I'm like, hey, tell me about the Bin Laden raid. No, tell us a cop story first. They really like cop stories. But one of the things that one of them said to me is, hey, you know what it is, Jim? Real knows real. And that's that is important. I think real cops know real cops, and if they don't have to be wearing a blue uniform, they could have a brown uniform on. They could be working in a one-man shop or whatever, but they really do the job and they're real. I think there's a certain core that runs through real cops, and not everybody gets hired as a real cop.
You know what? I gotta say, and this is easily the highlight of the show. As I put them out the next morning, I think that dialogue is, and I'm not just saying this because you're sitting here, Chief, is one of the most honest perspectives I've ever heard on leadership, especially in law enforcement. The way you laid that out, I've never heard somebody who was in your position put it that way before. But you know what? Hey, you're right. Real does know real. And to recognize that as a leader and put that out there as bluntly as you just did, there's no way I could follow that up. That was very eloquent.
Very rare that anyone says I'm eloquent. Matter of fact, I had all kinds of recommendations, like, Jim, remember there's a statute of limitations. Jim, some of the guys I work with said, how many episodes does Mike have lined up for you?
As many as you'd like, and 2010 comes around. By this point, it's almost 30 years. You were acting chief for a bit, for a little less than a calendar year. I think about 7 or 8 months or so, as you mentioned earlier.
8 months, yeah.
And then you called it a career. By that point, was there something specific that made you retire? Was it something lined up in the private sector? What made you say, you know what, okay, it's time to go?
I had people talking to me about jobs. I really couldn't imagine anything other than what I was doing, but I was really in a war with our politicians, like a massive war. Like they, like, I guess a couple months in, I get a call in the middle from the union at night and say, they just voted to lay off 13 cops and demote 12. I'm like, what? We're down 10, so I call the liaison from the council and I say, hey, what's going on here? He says, call the clerk in the morning and you could get the names. I said, hey, Mike, these guys, this is people, but he, and then actually, it was kind of comical because they really didn't understand labor law. Like they thought they were going to pick and choose who they were going to demote and who they were going to lay off. No. It goes by seniority. So that went away. I had a bunch of other things happen like that. And, every day was just something stupid. So I decided it was time to go. But as a matter of fact, I mean, like really where I'm at right now, some of the stuff that went on, I retired. I didn't know what to do. And Bill Frere was the deputy chief in Patterson while he retired as the chief, but he called me and said, hey, I don't know if you're willing to do this, but there's a information sharing grant from Justice. You want to try and put it together and take a look at shootings, like and so I did. And then, that kind of parlayed into something that we have a really big program on now, but that original grant we got, we built a program, didn't last very long, but it was very, but it started us off on, right now we have a really, we put together a really good program that we tie in, shot spotter, NIBIN, shooting hits, a whole slew of things, so CODIS hits, so, those are just things like, and that kind of laid into like me I wound up working for Justice for a little while, doing the specific activity reporting. And then the UASI where I am now, the leadership came and said, hey, we'd like you to be the program manager. And that's what I'm still doing.
Now, for those that may not be familiar with the UASI, what exactly is that? What's the acronym?
It's the Urban Area Security Initiative. So there's 35 of them nationally. It's basically a federal funding program to provide dollars to high-risk urban areas to build regional capacity, regional capability. Obviously, the largest one is New York City, but we're a tier 1. We're New Jersey, starting in Middlesex County and kind of wrapping up around the Hudson up to Bergen and then out to Passaic and Morris, the border of New York City. We're ranked 7th in the country in risk, and we receive funding along those same lines. So we're actually, at a higher funding and risk level than Boston or Philly. So we're amongst like the 13 tier 1 UASIs, so that we get dollars. So ours UASI is kind of unique. We're not centered on one city, because Jersey City and Newark are like the core cities, but then the 7 counties, Middlesex, Bergen, Hudson, Union, Essex, and Morris are the UASI counties. So we have a charter with 7 people, and then myself, and actually my partner just left. Port Authority stole her, but I was able to hire a retired state police captain who's working with me now. So we basically just kind of herd the cats to some degree on the funding, but we get a decent amount of funding, and we've built a lot of programs, regional programs, and it's multidisciplinary. So we have, police, fire, EMS, hospitals, public health, critical infrastructure. We have like the Newark ship fire. We had our MUSAR. We have they responded. I mean, if you start getting the fire, there's some guys. Bayonne fire chief kind of runs that, Rob Seaberger. But there's that group, but they respond to all over. We have some really robust stuff. We're stuff I'm proud of. I don't know how much longer I can do this though. My wife wants to move to Florida.
I want to move to Florida because I can't take too much Connecticut winters. I'm good.
Do you want to go with my wife, Mike? Because I don't want to.
I'll take the basement. I'll sleep by the boiler. No problem. Well, you know what? It segues perfectly into what I wanted to ask you, though, before we get to the rapid fire, which is two-part question. First, the private sector. You've been involved in it for 13 years. Now you're still going, but let's take a look back, if you will, at the last 13 years. Impactful work, as you just laid out. So when you look back at what you've been doing since you stepped away from the Paramus Police in 2010, if you can define that in a sentence or two, how would you define what's been obviously very rewarding work and like I said, very impactful work?
It has been. I mean, and I'm going to say that, involved in a lot of things, but I mean, the people that I know, I mean, there's you had Russ pop on. I mean, how would I ever know Russ Porter? And I have so many people, but I mean, we have a Thursday morning call. I don't know if they're on, called the FIGs, the formerly important guys that will all work at, the DNI work for all different programs that are, some are retired or some are partially retired. But they're all, they're all like cream of the crop, people like real solid people. We're really lucky to meet people, they're like, I said the 10% are the best people in the world. I've been lucky enough that in these 13 years, mostly I'm dealing with those 10%.
Of course. You know what? And that's that's the thing that you see in first responders communities throughout, not just, of course, your area, but anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. Some of the greatest people, I should say, that you'll ever meet are those people that don't make too much of a big deal about what they do. But man, those are the people that have accomplished the most. They're the ones that are the most squared away. They're the ones that are the most impressive. The ones, like with anything, that toot their own horn, that make a big deal about their accomplishments. It's kind of like making a mountain out of a molehill. It's not much. But yeah, you said those 10%, those are the ones that really make the job, whatever that job might be. And the second part of the question is, again, this part of your career is closed, which is why maybe it entails a more refined, or not refined, but lengthy, I should say, an expanded answer, which is 29 years in the Paramus Police Department. You did a lot. You saw it from multiple angles as a patrolman, later on as a boss across different ranks. When you look back at that portion of your career in public safety, how would you define it in a sentence or two?
Roller coaster. I had some real highs. I had some real lows. I mean, but I do, I don't know if you call it mentoring, but another cop was talking to me about some issues that he's having, and he really had a storied career up to this point, And I said, look, you're never really going to be mature as a cop until you know what it's like for the hard knocks, because you're looking around saying, oh, that guy's getting crapped on, but look what he did, he deserved it. Well, that's the wrong answer, man. That guy getting crapped on, he didn't deserve it. He might have done something, but you've done something too. And he just went through a period where he just got banged around. And I said, look, you're going to be a much better cop, a much better boss, much better person, having driven on that unpaved road. You've been on a highway. You got to know what it's like to get off the highway and try to get through that road. Otherwise, when you see other people suffering, and we all have a tendency to do this, right? You all have a tendency, like, somebody, hey, Joe Blow just got friggin' jammed. He just got transferred or whatever. Oh, he asked for it. Yeah. But when you get transferred or screwed, did you ask for it? Sometimes, and it goes back to John Muller's thing. Really, if you don't have procedural justice in your agency, if you don't treat your people the way you want them to treat other people, if you don't treat, modeling is the greatest teacher. I saw cops that were beaten by bad bosses. Like, I worked next to them. They were tortured, right? They become a boss. They're torturing guys. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Well, because that's what they learned. That was the modeling. So, that's the problem. That's the problem in police work. If you got a bad culture, very difficult to break it. Very difficult to break it.
That's why change agents are important.
I want to shout out to the two guys I mentioned already, Freddie Krueger and Rick Carey. Our culture was kind of off the rails. A lot of vindictiveness, whatever. Those guys came in, they changed it around. He's dead now. A boss before that did a lot to try and change it too was Mickey McCormick, tough West Side Bulldog Marine that had the toughest facade and the biggest heart. But he did a lot to try and change it, but he couldn't quite get over the edge, and then it tanked for a while. And then Freddie became chief, Rick became deputy chief, and they pulled it out. But nothing lasts forever either. That's the things about the job. It's like you just said, NYPD. You're up high and somebody kicks the legs out from under you.
Yeah, the pendulum always swings. You just never know which way it's going to swing. There's the not so good days, and there's the glory days, and the not so good days. So it's always kind of, I don't want to say a vicious cycle. That's not the right analogy, but I guess the pendulum it's always swinging back and forth and back. And that brings us now, the hour 15 has really gone by. I've enjoyed the conversation immensely with you, to the rapid fire, which, as you know from watching the show, it's the 5 hit run questions, which you can say pass anytime that you would like to. And I'm going to tinker around. Like normally I would ask, as you've heard me do with firemen and cops alike, most uplifting job, but I'll change it here because uplifting can entail different things in the job. So I'll say happiest moment on the job, which could be anything, doesn't have to be a call. What was it for you?
I think getting promoted. I think promotion to captain was like that was I didn't think that would ever happen. I was like an unpromotable patrolman for a long time, and I think that really, that was a rank like I never thought I would achieve, let alone then deputy chief. But I never thought I'd be a captain.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I mean, I saw lots of cool things on the job and lots of things that made me smile. But, for me personally, that was something I never thought would happen.
And that's why I wanted to ask a question in that manner, and I got a good answer, so I'm glad I did. Second, there were 3 decades during your career, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. So favorite decade of your career? Well,
I would say that, like, as a cop, fun as a cop, I loved the 80s. I was too young to really know that I was still doing union stuff. I thought I was Samuel Gompers or something. I was really like, I was, a labor guy, but I was also out there as a cop, and it was busy. I mean, the crack years and stuff like that. I mean, I know everyone thought so Paramus, we had a lot of, there's a lot of transients. We had a lot of crap that went on, but there was always stuff going on. There was all, I shouldn't say it, but there were a lot of robberies on the midnights. You worked midnight tours, and I worked as many midnight tours as I could. We did rotate, but our 4th week was called Power. That was where they split the squad up and put them wherever they were needed. I would always trade to get to midnights. So I would work midnights days, midnights 3 to 11s, midnights days. What probably didn't make it healthiest, but it was a lot of fun. Midnights I love midnights.
Grab an energy drink and get after it.
Yeah, I just like being out there, and it's just like you're in another world. And I always like so much crazy shit would go on. I don't know to say that, but anyway, so much crazy stuff would happen during the the middle of the night, and then the sun would come up, and you'd watch all the commuters come out and people out, and the whole world like it never happened, but you were there. It did happen.
Oh, it did happen. Yep, there's a record of it. And Chief Carey puts in the chat, Mike, as you have heard during this interview, you can see why Paramus and Chief Karubi and myself were fortunate to have had Jim Sheehan working with and for us. So nice remarks from Mr. Carey, and I appreciate you tuning in tonight, sir. And you should come on the show if you would like to. So I'd be happy to hear your stories.
He's
too.
Another recommendation. Super sharp guy. Tell some good stories too. Some homicide investigations and whatnot, where flying all over the country, Montana, people hiding in Korea, Oh,
okay, yeah. There you go. All right, Chief Carey, come on down.
Yeah,
we'll make the time.
I'll hook you up, Mike.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Third, favorite cop show or cop movie, or both?
The Wire.
Yes.
When I watch The Wire, I know every one of those guys. I mean, or maybe it's a conglomerate of guys I know, but the Wire is the realest, and so many things in it. It's just a great show. It's a great show, and it's a show it's a cop show of times that are past. Jimmy McNulty trying to make that turn, I knew those guys. But nowadays they'd be locked up and fired. But it was a different world.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Very
yeah.
different. Very different.
That show was more. It was an uncut version of Homicide: Life on the Street.
Yes. Yeah. Same producer, right?
Yep.
What's his name?
David Simon.
David Simon. Yeah.
David Simon. And same thing. Homicide: Life on the Street. To this day, guys tell me the most realistic portrayal of a detective squad they've ever seen.
And I covered the Fusion Center, the MCAC, the Maryland Center, which was run by a Baltimore. Dave Engel was a Baltimore cop that ran it. So I got to meet a lot of Baltimore cops, and they all said the same thing. They said, "Hey, it's real." And if you've been to Baltimore, even if you take the Amtrak and go past Baltimore, you'll see all those vacants and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you a funny story. John Jay brings in the two Garda every year onto McCabe scholarship. They two Irish cops. So a bunch of my friends teach there, and Bill Frere is one of them. And he said to me, "Hey, just the one female cop that she got kind of screwed on an internship," and he said, "Hey, they're going to let you help set it up." So I really did it as like I got her like ride-alongs, and I got her so she could write a thing on a bunch of different police agencies. So I was taking her out to Patterson, which Frere was freaking out about, and we were driving down Broadway, and with that brogue, she said to me, "Oh, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Jim, is this where they shot The Wire?" Patterson has like a slew of abandoned, buildings, vacants as you ride by, whatever. But it's a very similar looking city. I mean, there's like that. I always thought Patterson had that look of a southern city. When you get to Philly and you go south, they have a different look to the cities. But but I love The Wire.
Oh yeah, legendary show for sure. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in Paramus? You could say multiple. You don't got to say one.
Well, they're all the restaurants that and bars that were like, single owners, they're all gone. Places we hung out, but there was a bar on Paramus Road. It was a bar restaurant, but it was kind of a nightclub called Nichols Alley. It was it was a nightclub. It was not like an old man cop bar, but it was the cop friendliest bar around. As a matter of fact, it didn't really close. So it was a great place to go. And it's gone. And Paramus is almost, there's nothing left that's owned, personally owned. It's all corporate. Corporate restaurants, chains, whatever. It's got the highest retail sales by zip code in the United States, or at least rates in there, in the top 3, and it's closed on Sundays.
That's a little tricky for me. But then again, what I say earlier, I guess you could apply this to retail too. The pendulum always swings. There's going to be somebody that'll open up a local restaurant down the road or a local bar, and you know what? Hey, that might take off, and that might get the ball rolling. You never know. There's always ebbs and flows with everything, especially with the economy and business of a city. And fifth and finally, we've talked about it tonight, but we can expand on it here. Let's say you grab a cop fresh out the academy, Paramus or wherever. What advice would you give them based on 29 years of experience in a police department and 13 years of experience additionally working in the private sector with law enforcement?
Well, something that I wish somebody had said to me, I might have had a smoother career, and something I often wanted to say to an FTO: you're not going to learn anything with your mouth open. Mm-hmm. So it's the personality. I mean, we suck in the A personalities, and they tend to I watch guys that are salty with a year on. Hey pal, you got a year on. You're not brand new, but man, you don't know anything.
Right, you got a long way to go.
Yeah,
long way to go. You never stop learning. The second that you feel like you do stop learning, it's probably time to go because you're going to get yourself hurt or you're going to get somebody else hurt. So that's true. That's across the board. Fire service, police service, definitely wise words from you, Chief. And I appreciate this interview. Stick around. We'll say our goodbyes off the air. Before I say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything that you'd like to give?
I give it to my fake friends, thanks for the guys that came on there that are listening to this. I since you got the ESU picture up there, I don't know if he's on, but Norm Ginn, he was there. He's really the guy that built our ESU from a patrolman up. He's a lieutenant now. He runs the unit, but he's just a lot of vision and a lot of work. And and the people I mentioned, Mike McGillen, before he's dead, he got killed in 1976 on the job. So him and my classmate at the Academy, Vinnie Brock, got killed in 1993 on the job, both MBAs. But that's it, Mike. I appreciate it, and I appreciate what you're doing. I think I said it to you earlier on. I think there's a lot of police officers. There's a lot of jobs out there. Get very little recognition. Get very little resources. A lot of them don't even get very much pay. They deserve to be recognized, and I really appreciate the fact that you're reaching out to do that.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a privilege to talk to you guys, and we're going to keep expanding. We're already at 6 volumes of this miniseries, and there's definitely more to come as we go. So I appreciate it. And like I said, stick around. We'll say our goodbyes off the air. Coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, as I mentioned, it's fitting he worked in auto crime because his last name, I kid you not, is Ferrari. He's also an author. He has a podcast of his own. Retired NYPD detective Vic Ferrari will be here this Friday. That'll be at 7 o'clock Eastern time. And then September 19th, back to the news side of things. She's a daughter of an FDNY legend, Paul Hashagen, who worked in Rescue 1. She's on News 12 as an anchor. And that is Elizabeth Hashagen. For those of you that live on Long Island, of course, you know her from her many years, currently still on News 12 Long Island. So she'll be here next Tuesday, 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Sharp. So a couple of good shows coming up with Detective Ferrari and Mrs. Hashagen alike. In the meantime, on behalf of retired Chief James Sheehan of the Paramus Police Department in New Jersey, I'm Mike Colón. This has been Volume 6 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your night. See you Friday.